In the interest of education and enlightenment, I begin the reading of the Iroquois reprints entitled The Constitution of the Five Nations, or the Iroquois Book of the Great Law by A.C. Parker, and the date is May 13th, 2023. The Iroquois Constitution. The Constitution of the Iroquois League is known to the Iroquois as the Great Binding Law, or the Great Immutable Law. It was transmitted orally from one generation to another through certain of the lords, or sachems, of the Confederacy who had made it their business to learn it. Not until recently have the Iroquois attempted to put their code in written form. For many generations, its knowledge has been preserved by a collection of wampum belts and strings, each of which served to recall each law or regulation. Many of the belts and strings became lost or destroyed, and fearing a total destruction of their ancient archives, the Six Nations of New York Indians in 1898 elected the University of the State of New York the official custodian of their wampum. The university accepted the charge, and the legislature passed suitable laws governing the custody of the wampum. In 1908, the director of the State Museum was proclaimed the keeper of the wampum by Sa Hawi, president of the Six Nations. I take a moment here to say that if you do manage to get a hold of this book and read it yourself, you will see that I do not speak many of the indigenous language terms, for I do not know how to speak of them properly. I wanted to say this so you are aware, and now I will continue. The Iroquois Constitution is mentioned by both Morgan and Hale, but neither seems to have been able to make a transcript and translation of it. All the Iroquois nations were acquainted with it, and extracts from the law are found in many of the speeches of their sachems, as recorded by historians, notably the French explorers and Colden. The version of the Constitution now held authentic by the Iroquois of New York and Ontario embraces a narrative of the events in the lives of Hiawatha and Ngandavita that lead up to its foundation. Its special interest lies in the fact that it is an attempt of the Iroquois themselves to explain their own civic and social system. It is therefore an invaluable guide to many interesting branches of Iroquois ethnology. Many of the facts contained in this document are familiar to students, but that they formed a part of a definite system of law will perhaps be new. Several of the wampum belts in the New York State Museum are constitutional belts or memorials. Originally, the Five Nations of Iroquois were similar to other Indian tribes or bands, independent bodies with similar dialects and similar customs, but with no political coherence. Each man and each tribe to itself was the rule. Often the individual nations warred with one another, and with external enemies pressing them from all quarters, they found themselves in a precarious situation. The very peril in which they lived developed their strategic ability and fostered diplomacy. It likewise produced leaders and finally the great lawgiver who should bring about peace and unity and make the Iroquois the, quote, Indians of Indian, unquote, the, quote, Romans of the New World, unquote. Hale referred to Hiawatha as the, quote, lawgiver of the Stone Age, unquote, but Hiawatha does not deserve the title. He was only the spokesman of a greater mind. The Mohawk Nation recognizes Indegandavida its great culture hero and the founder of its civic system, giving Hiawatha a second place. Nearly all authorities among the other nations of the five agree in this and attribute to Degandavida the establishment of the Great Peace. The prefatory articles of the great immutable law recognize him as such and represent him as saying, I am Degandavida, and with the five nations, confederate lords, I plant the tree of the great peace. I plant it in your territory, Adadora, and the Onondaga Nation, in the territory of you who are fire keepers. I name the tree of the great long leaves. Under the shade of this tree of the great peace, we spread the soft white feathery down of the globe thistle as seats for you, Adadora, and your cousin lords. There shall you sit and watch the council fire of the confederacy of the five nations. Roots have spread out from the tree of the great peace, and the name of these roots is the great white roots of peace. If any man of any nation outside of the five nations shall show a desire to obey the laws of the great peace, they may trace the roots to their source, and they should be welcomed to take shelter beneath the tree of the long leaves. The smoke of the Confederate Council fire shall ever ascend and shall pierce the sky so that all nations may discover the central council fire of the great peace. I, Degandavida, and the Confederate lords now uproot the tallest pine tree, and into the cavity thereby made we cast all weapons of war. Into the depths of the earth, down into the deep earth currents of water, flowing into unknown regions, we cast all weapons of strife. We bury them from sight forever, and plant again the tree. Thus shall all great peace be established, and hostilities shall no longer be known between the five nations, but only peace to a united people.